god, that is crazy. It's like you read my mind. That is like that's the most honest dilemma I have faced in my life ever. But you absolutely nailed me with that question. That was like you lasered in on my interest right there.
Hi, Derek. Welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy to have you on.
Excited to be here, man. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, I'm so curious because when I was talking to Webtoon, you were the first person that they were like, yeah, like if you're interested, we'd love to have you talk to Derek. And I'm like, awesome, like let's do it.
I think I am lucky right now that Fantasy High, my recent title, just came out, so they're
Yeah.
pushing me a little more to talk to people. But this is very strange for me too. Before this, I have some other titles that I was not doing nearly as much talking about, so this
hmm
is all very new. But I'm very excited. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really interested to get into how you just kind of got into Webtoon and became a Webtoon writer. So how did that all start for you?
Well, getting into Webtoon happened a couple years earlier than I actually started writing for them. I first heard of Webtoon back in maybe 2018, late 2018, when one of my friends, I'm sure this is actually a fairly common story, one of my friends just told me about this comic called Lore Olympus.
Yeah.
That was the first one I had ever heard of. And I didn't, at that point, I knew what webcomics were, but I wasn't reading any of them really. I was a traditional Marvel DC comic fan. So I checked out this Lore Olympus thing, and it was the first time I'd ever seen like the vertical scroll. And I remember like immediately I was so blown away. And I remember specifically having to stitch together, like I wanted this really long screenshot of this transition that she was doing in Lore Olympus
Yeah.
in the first episode. And I remember it was too big for my screen. So I was like, I had to take multiple screenshots and then go into Photoshop and stitch them together just so I could look at it and be like, wow, what an incredible effect she was going for.
He's really
Um,
good at that.
yeah. And that was, I mean, and since then, I mean, I've discovered so many incredible artists just absolutely like pushing the boundaries on what you could do with vertical scroll. But I was just so amazed in that first one. But I didn't really, for whatever reason, I didn't really like look around the site as much at that time. It was really just like, okay, Lore Olympus is amazing, got it. And I just sort of stocked that in the back of my mind. And then a couple years later, maybe towards the end of 2019 or early 2020, I was starting to work on my own comics, and I had this comic that I wanted to put out, and I like we were almost done with it, and then I thought I need somewhere to upload this. I have no idea where people upload comics. I have no idea where people read them. So I went back to, I was thinking about Lore Olympus again, and I saw that Webtoon had its own Canvas section, and I uploaded there. And then a little bit after that, Webtoon announced its short story contest. And that's where I like really started to like I knew I wanted to enter, which meant like, okay, I gotta really like figure out what is a webtoon, like what is a webcomic, what is a vertical scroll comic, what does that mean, what kind of stories are people telling there, and that's why I really started to dive in and read a bunch of stuff that have gone on to become like, my favorites. That's when I discovered I'm the Grim Reaper, which is one of my favorite comics to this day.
hmm
Um, I ended up losing that contest, but at that point I was bit. I was like
Yeah.
which is actually the contest going on right now. I recently posted about like, hey, if you didn't make it to the next round, like, please don't let that discourage you because
Oh
I
yeah.
was in that same position. I lost and I was so devastated. But I did, after a little bit of a grieving process, I went back to the drawing board. I said, you know, I really, really like this medium. I think it's really cool. It's doing things I haven't seen anyone else do before. And also, there was like this clear pipeline of success from Canvas to originals that I didn't like. Obviously, I always dreamed about like, oh, it'd be so cool to write like Batman or something. But it's not very clear what the steps are to become a writer at DC Comics. That's where when I looked at Webtoon, I saw this like very clear, you could be a creator, creating your own thing on Canvas, anyone can upload. And if it's good enough, if people like it enough, suddenly you could go become an original and suddenly this is your career. And that path was just so enlightening to me. So from that point
Yeah.
on, I really yeah, I got bit by the bug and I was making webtoons ever since. And yeah, eventually it worked out. Eventually, they reached out to me, and now I'm writing for them.
So, was your first series that you were writing for them, was that Paranoid Mage?
I was working on Paranoid Mage and another novel adaptation at the same time called The Primal Hunter. I was doing both of
Oh,
those
yeah, okay.
simultaneously. Um, Yeah, pretty much. I think I started on Primal Hunter like a couple weeks beforehand, and then very quickly was doing both titles. And then around like halfway into both of those productions, I started doing another title called The Last Bloodline. So at that point, I was then doing 3 titles all at once, which is, as a writer, is a little bit easier than as an artist. So don't be too impressed by me. It was actually, if an artist was doing anything close to the same amount of titles, that person is legendary. I'm just, normal.
Yeah, sorry,
But
I got the
then,
name wrong. The Last
no, no,
Bloodline.
no worries, no worries. And then towards the end of my time on all 3 of those titles is when Fantasy High picked up. So there's a very brief window where I was working on 4 titles, and that was when it started to get a little bit difficult.
Oh
I'll be
my
honest.
goodness. Wow. Okay, so tell me about your process for writing. Like, where does this start for you? And how does that kind of work out? Like, who are you working with in the like pre-production stages?
Well, for a title that I'm working with them, it's usually they approach me with a rough concept. Well, if it's something like Fantasy High, they say like, "Hey, we're adapting this specific thing." But there have been titles in the past where it's a little more vague, where it's like we have a title, we have a log line, we have a short blurb. What do you think about this? Do you have an angle? So that's if I'm working with Webtoon itself, that's usually how that starts. If I'm developing my own concepts, it really does just, I mean, it could come from anywhere. I tend to like, it was just like a little bit of a marketing gimmick in my brain, but I tend to really like working with public domain characters. I
Mm.
love, you know, I'll, I really want to write a Red Riding Hood story. That's been something that's like noodling in my brain.
Hmm.
I also really like, like Greek mythology. I mean, obviously, if I'm a huge fan of Lore and Olympus,
Yeah.
naturally, we're all trying to write Greek mythology. But also, I'm Cambodian, and sometimes some Cambodian folklore influences me
Mm.
of things I'd like to play around with. So if it's my own title, then I have a little bit more freedom, and in that regard, ideas can come from anywhere. But for Webtoon proper stuff, they usually come to me and say like, "Hey, we have this idea. What do you have an angle on it?"
So, what did you think when they're like, "Hey, we are adapting Fantasy High"? I bet that for you, I bet that was like, "You want me to write for
Yeah.
this?"
That was huge. I should say that I was a huge Fantasy High fan even before
Yeah.
knowing about this webtoon. I was a fan since 2020. I think I discovered it during lockdown, like a lot of other people.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was a massive fan. I remember sending like some of the like animated clips they had done for like on their YouTube channel, sending it to my friends, being like, "This is." I specifically remember sharing a Bud Cubby clip, which is this like no this halfling in the story who is complete anarchist and but is like so cute and unsuspecting, and it's just one of the most iconic moments of the show. And I remember sending it to my friends and like, this is hilarious. I've never like, I was a huge Critical Role fan even before that, so
Hmm.
D&D live play, actual play
Yeah.
was something I was always interested in, but Fantasy High was doing something a little bit different where it was like so comedic focused that I was just, yeah, I became a big fan really quickly. So I was already a fan when Fantasy High, the webtoon, came on the table, and when I had heard about it, I started campaigning very, very hard. I started basically saying like anyone I could message about it, I would message about it. I would tell them, like, please, I am such a huge fan. I will, if someone has to do this, please let it be me. And I think as part of like the hiring process, I wrote so many drafts of that initial pilot. I mean, we wrote multiple drafts of the pilot as a whole, and then we did like an additional 4 or 5 different introduction scenes, just trying because I was, and then on top of that, so all they asked me for is a script. I also then wrote an essay about why I love Fantasy High
Oh
and
my
why I love
gosh.
Dimension 20, and here's my entire like methodology. I was just so, in fact, I think I probably went overboard. I'm gonna be honest, I went overboard, but I don't even know if they read the essay. But I just knew that like
Oh.
this was a dream project, and if I didn't put everything I had into it, I would regret it later down the line. So I said, screw it. I'm sending them all these drafts. I'm sending them all my essays, and I'm gonna send them a billion messages too because I just want it that bad.
Yeah.
And it worked out. So maybe that was the right play.
That is amazing. I feel like it's even more cool that you were already such a big fan of Fantasy High and like Dimension 20. And I hadn't discovered Dimension 20 until my husband and I started watching shows on Dropout.
Hmm.
And he loves like he listened to the Adventure Zone, uh just like more of like the D&D live play
Hmm.
stuff. So yeah, that's really cool that you're able to just
Yeah,
hop on and be the writer for it.
I do think. I've adapted multiple things now, and I've loved everything that I work on. But I do think there is something special about having been a fan before I'd ever even knew that this project's on the table, because ultimately, like, I think the key to good adaptation is reverence for the source material. And I don't think I use the term reverence rather than like faithfulness, because I think
Mhm.
anytime you're adapting anything, stuff has to be changed. Not every element, even the things I love about Fantasy High, if it was like really like improv focused, or if it was like something someone said out of character, it's difficult to bring that into the webtoons. There were things that I love that I had to cut. But at the end of the day, I like to think that everything I cut was coming from a place of reverence, of that, like, I'm doing this because I love this and because I want it to be the best that it can be. Not because I think that product was flawed and I could do better, but because someone has to make this hard choice. And at least I know that, like, I'm tapped into, at least I like to imagine I'm tapped into what the fan base will be thinking. So if someone does have to cut this, is there a way that we could like still pay, an homage to it in some way? Can we like reference it in some way that they'll still appreciate, that we know, like, hey, we're not like callous about this. We're thinking about you. We're thinking about your experience, while still at the same time trying to appeal to new readers, because naturally, as any adaptation, the goal is always to, to play to both masters of like the existing fans and also these, people who have never even heard of Fantasy High before. So it is this really delicate balance, but I think the balance is always easier to maintain as long as you are truly and honestly a fan who reveres the original product. Um, and of course, I think you can go a little too far, where it's like you revere it too much that you are terrified and paralyzed and you can't make any changes. So that's also something to be a little wary of. But ultimately, you know, I've seen adaptations of things where it's clearly, like, this was just a job, and I think fans can tell. Just to be perfectly honest, I think fans can tell when the passion is there. When, even if, I think about that One Piece live action show. This came out during the time where I was, still in the like early stages of working on Fantasy Eye, and I remember I'm a huge One Piece fan, and I remember like this was one of the first times where it was like an anime adaptation was seemingly getting it right. And it wasn't getting it right because it was so faithful. In fact, it was incredibly not faithful at all. Like, just by necessity, it was so much shorter than the original material was. It had to be. But it was such clear passion. I remember finishing the first two episodes and like actually crying, because there was so much clear homage being paid and so much reverence, and keeping this the silly stuff, where it's like it'd be very easy to say like, we're not going to do snail phones because that's silly. It's a talking snail. Just give them a walkie-talkie. And like, sure, that'd be reasonable, but that's One Piece. One Piece is silly and whimsical, and by maintaining that when you didn't have to, I think you buy a lot of fan goodwill. So that was like, I was watching that One Piece live action show, and I was really trying to hold on to that feeling it gave me and try to bring that as much as I could to Fantasy High, and like, that paying respect and being truly reverent.
Yeah, and that, as I've read Fantasy High, that totally comes through for me too. It's like I can
I hope it
see.
does.
Yeah, it does. Like it's funny because sometimes you can't exactly put words to it, but sometimes you can just tell that the people working on whatever it is, in this case a webtoon, you can tell that they're just really driven and passionate about it, and that does come through for me as I read it.
Yeah, I'll be entirely honest. We've been working on this Fantasy Eye for multiple years at this point, and there was many times during that process where I was like, I don't know what fans are going to think. I think that I am trying as hard as I can. I think the art team is doing fantastic work. I think, the producers, everyone here cares. We're all trying our hardest, but at the end of the day, you just never know. You could put out something and there's something you overlooked, you didn't think about it, and now everyone's laser focused on that, and it, or maybe you just, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I thought I was tapped into the fan base in a way that I wasn't, and maybe they just don't jive with it. And for so many months in the build up, especially, in the weeks leading up to it, I was so scared. And to be honest, I'm still a little scared. I try not to read too many comments, but I do think one of the things that really surprised me is we had such a huge warm welcome when it first got announced and like those first articles came out. I left like a Reddit comment on the Dimension 20 subreddits, and I just got so many people replying to my, not a single person replying to my comment said anything negative. It was all like, "We believe in you. This is so amazing. I'm so excited." A lot of like hoot growl, which is like a reference to the show, and it was just so positive and warm. And then I get people like following me on social media and messaging me and saying like, "Hey, this is amazing, so good." And then we had like a really great like our score. We had like a 9.86 to start with,
Mhm.
which was just, I don't know, just I never, like, I thought, not that you should put a lot of stock into your rating. I think in
Mhm.
fact it's probably pretty bad, but I couldn't help it. I was like,
Yeah.
please just give me something like maybe like higher than a 9. Anything lower than 9, I'd be a little worried. And have a 9.86, I was just, yeah, I feel like uh I I always hoped and believed that we had something good here, but it was so reassuring and so um yeah, positively unexpected to how the fans received it.
Yeah, and I mean, when I scroll through the comments, I'm seeing people who are already existing fans of Fantasy High, and then people who'd never heard of it that started getting into the show and started watching it and just became really passionate about, Dimension 20 and all the projects that they do just because they had read Fantasy High. So that's got to be really great for everyone that worked on the
Yeah,
project.
I mean, I hope so. I mean, I think it would be such a great thing if obviously I'm on the webtoon side of it all, so I want the webtoon to succeed. But as a fan of Dimension 20, if you found Dimension 20 through this and started watching them, and then like actually, they have a new series coming out called Cloudward Ho. I'm watching Cloudward Ho. If that's your first series jumping in, that's so amazing. I truly think. I don't even know if I really thought about that, but yeah, that'd be so crazy. Um, Shout out to anyone who is doing that now.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, what has been kind of the most challenging aspect of this sort of adaptation with Dimension 20's Fantasy High into a webcomic?
I mean, there was a lot. I'll be honest. It was really, as much as I love doing it, and I'm still writing the last couple episodes now. As much as I love it and would do it again, and you know all those nice things, it is so hard. It's insanely difficult. Easily the hardest title I've worked on thus
Mm,
far. Largely because it's like such a different medium. I've worked on these web novel adaptations where I have to make changes. I have to do this stuff, but like ultimately, like the story is the story, and it's relatively like the translation is not that abstract. Here, it was the definition of abstract. It was, you know, it's an improvised comedy show about Dungeons and Dragons, and I have to translate that. And there's like 60 hours of material. Each episode is 2 hours, and I have to somehow fit that into like a 60 to 80 panel episode. And that is so insanely difficult. I mean, one of the very first problems that both I and the producers knew, I wrote about this in my essay, and also they had independently, before I had even sent my essay, talked to me about it as well, which is we knew we couldn't just do a straight ensemble right from the beginning. There are not many ensemble titles on Webtoon. There are some, and they are great, but it is very difficult to ask a Webtoon reader to be like, hey, here's 8 characters you've never heard of, you've never seen before, and they're all equally important, and I'm going to give you all of their full names right now. And in the case of Fantasy High, I'm going to introduce their mother, their father, their brothers. It's like that is such a huge ask. And I love Fantasy High episode 1, the actual show. But the show is like, it's 6 unconnected vignettes introducing all these characters and their home life. And only like an hour and a half in do we finally get to the school and see these characters interact for a while. If we were going to be truthfully faithful to that, it's possible we wouldn't get to the academy until like episode 5 or 6, and we just knew
mhm,
like that wasn't viable. It just wouldn't work. So early on, it was clear to all of us that like we're gonna have to pick a character, we're gonna have to follow them for at least a couple episodes, and then maybe by like episode 8 or 9, then once all the characters are properly introduced and the audience is familiar with them, then we could treat this story like a true ensemble piece. But we needed someone to follow us from the very early on. And I knew from the get go it was going to be the character Riz, who is a goblin. There were some questions where I was honestly trying to make it work with another character called Fig, which is a tiefling, just because one, I love Fig a lot, and also I think readers who haven't even heard of Fantasy High would also really love Fig. So there was some questions early on about like, is it possible to do this with Fig as the protagonist for a little while? But ultimately, Riz's connection to the overall plot was just too strong to really deny. So we knew going in that like, okay, so Riz is our protagonist. Now, what does that actually mean? Like, because now I'm gonna have to skip all of these other scenes. Can I rework them in? Both in terms of, you know, fans would be really disappointed if we didn't include this, and also some of these scenes are like really important for the plot. You know, Adine has a scene very early on where she learns that the Elven Oracle died, and that loops back in later on. And I couldn't just skip that. So then it became like a real puzzle of like, okay, if I skip this, then it has to go back in here. And if I get rid of this scene, I could put the scene over here, or I could just take the information in that scene and put it over here. And it was like a real, and shout out to Brendan Lee Mulligan. His stories are way heavier plot wise than you would think. Like when I first passively watched Fantasy High as a fan, I wasn't really like, I was passively watching it, and I wasn't really aware of all the like small intricate plot details that like unwound into this huge thread later on. And when I was actually now sitting down and writing it, I was like, oh my god, I didn't write about this character's rat companion, and now that rat companion appears 18 episodes later. And it's like so many times that happened where I just had to go back and like, okay, well, let me a very specific example. There's a vulture who appears in an early episode, and even within the context of Fantasy High freshman year, that vulture is not relevant. It's like it's a joke, but it doesn't really like, it has no huge impact. But in Fantasy High junior year, I'm not saying the webtoon will ever get there, but in the show Fantasy High junior year, that vulture comes back. So I now had to go back and be like, okay, I cut this vulture because I thought it wasn't relevant. But Brennan, 6 years later, just made this vulture relevant again. So I have to
Dang
go
it,
put the
Brennan.
vulture back in. And luckily, that was actually very fortuitous timing of like that episode of Fantasy High Junior Year just came out like shortly after I had written that episode. So it was a little bit easier to go back in and fix it. But yeah, I mean, there's so many things like that in the entire story of truly just like looking at it like a puzzle, and like if I move things, how do I fit them back in, and yeah, and all that is very, very difficult. But I mean, it was
Yeah.
ultimately so rewarding. You know, like if I wasn't a fan, maybe less so. But because I am such a huge fan, of course, I mean, this is a puzzle. People love doing puzzles. This is a puzzle I want to solve. So yeah, I mean, it was a lot of fun, even as difficult as it was.
A fun, chaotic mess.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, just from my perspective, that sounds like crazy amount of work, and no wonder it took you guys so long to kind of get it going and start working on
Yeah,
it. Because how much time do you think it took you to kind of work out the plot of the webtoon?
yeah. I'm a natural outliner, so I will say like I do like to have a full outline before I start really getting into it. Um, I'm also like I think I like to think I'm relatively quick. So I had the outline done within a week or two, but the outline is a living document. You know, it's always
Yeah.
getting revised. Even as recently as like a couple of weeks ago, I had to make changes again to the outline.
Mm,
So I do believe in, and I have a very thorough outline. It's literally like it's 20 to 30 pages long. It's every single scene in every single episode,
wow.
bullet pointed down. And um yeah, I'm very thorough. And even then, I think part of the reason why I am so thorough is because it gives me a little bit of freedom to discover as I write, as later on, because I know I have this safety net behind me. But also, like there are times where it's like, okay, well, I thought this moment would work this way, and it's not quite working. So I think I need to restructure these scenes. So the outline has to get changed. Or, this happens a lot. Is like, okay, I wrote this episode down in theory being able to fit one episode, and now I'm at panel 89 and I cannot fit any more panels in here. Otherwise, the art team is going to murder me. So unfortunately, I got to figure out how to make this work, and again, switch scenes around and stuff. So it's very difficult, but I do think, I don't know, it's part of my process, and I think uh it seems to have worked out so far. So
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to ask, did you work with any of the cast from Dimension 20, or were they just kind of like, yeah, well, like we want you to adapt this, or did you work with them at all?
I would say I did not personally. I know that the producers of the webtoon are in contact with Dimension 20
Okay.
team. I know that they have given us notes. We got, particularly on the first episodes,
Mhm.
like up until the day we released them, we were still like tweaking small things here and there.
Yeah.
There's specifically scenes where it's like, um, I had cut a scene with Fig, where she was like sort of jokingly flirting with the vice principal, because I just didn't, as much as I love that joke in the show, I didn't see the angle. Like I didn't know if we had the space, and then I just felt like it was messing with the pacing, and I just didn't see it, and we cut it. And then like again, I mean I wrote that years ago at this point, and then we have the finished episode. The Dimension 20 team looks over it and says like, hey, we really like this moment, and I think the producers like brainstorm, and they saw an angle that I didn't, and all the more power to them. I think one of the benefits of working on a production like this is you have such a huge team behind you that like collaboration really does breed some like new ideas where it's like I think there's beauty in being a sole creator where it's like purely your artistic vision. But I just know for a fact, having been through this so many times, that like there are times where I don't see something, but that doesn't mean it's not possible. And someone else might see the way to do it that I didn't. And, as long as I could set aside my ego, which hopefully, I try to, then, best idea wins. And I saw that so many times where whether it was the storyboard. I mean, there's so many, especially the storyboard artist. That's the artist I work most closely with because it immediately comes right after my scripts. So if I'm going to give any notes, it's usually going to be on storyboards. And the storyboard artist has so many times been like, I describe something as Fig steps on a counter to scream out to the room, and they change it as like, well, what if I don't know if a counter really works for the geometry of the scene? What if we change to like she steps on this is a little bit of a spoiler. She steps on like a disco ball that fell from the ceiling. It's like, okay, that is so much better. It's like so much more visually dynamic than anything I came up with. Actually, that's not a spoiler. The episode came out already, so I'm
Yeah.
fine. I did not do anything bad. But yeah, I think there's so many times where just because I didn't figure out how to do it doesn't mean someone else couldn't have. And I think that's one of the beauty of like having so many people working alongside who all want this to be as great as it possibly can be. Whether it's the producers, the storyboard artist, the line artist, whoever. I think I love reading the episodes afterwards because it's like, oh, I didn't picture that way at all. And yet the way the line artist just drew this like facial expression, it's like, it's totally not at all what I thought. And yet it's like so much funnier this way. And yeah, there's just I couldn't even name all the examples.
Yeah, that's incredible that you can work with a team that also helps you improve it or think outside of the box a little bit in terms of
Mhm.
portraying the scene or the things in the episode. So that's a really cool angle of working on a team like this. Because I'm so used to just
Yeah.
being solo and like doing everything myself. So but I love like a team, in my past experience working with teams, like marketing and design teams, whatever. So I really appreciate the collaborative aspect to it. And that's really cool that you can just work with these guys and you're all working together and you created something so cool.
I will say there are times, you know, the grass is always greener on the other side. So there are definitely times where it's like, I've worked on stories where it's like I feel like my voice is getting drowned out a little bit, and this is not Fantasy High, but I feel like my voice is getting drowned out a little bit, and man, it would be great to just write something where I had full total control, and then I'm writing that, and it's great for a little while, and then suddenly I'm like, I don't know what the next step is, and I wish I could have someone just read it, and hopefully I send it to someone and they can, but like I think the more you play in any side, the more you start looking to the other side and being like, man, that must be the dream. So I try to flip flop. I try to. I mean, as a writer in the webtoon space, I am always working with at least one other person, an artist. But I vary from like there are productions I'm on where it's just me and the artist. And then there are other productions like Fantasy High where it's like we have an entire team and like multiple producers and all that. And I think both of them have their place. And I do think there is something to be said about like the pure artistic vision of one person delivering the entire thing from the start. I do think in many ways that is like like when done correctly, that is the peak. But I do think we also should acknowledge that like it's very hard to do that correctly. So that's where like a collaboration can sort of like raise up your floor a little bit. Um, so yeah, I think both are fantastic for different reasons.
Yeah, so when you're working with your storyboard artist and sending them what you've written, what does that look like? Like, are you sending them kind of a traditional script with like stage directions, or how does it look?
Yeah, I have a script. It's difficult because there isn't really a standard comic script that exists, and certainly not a standard like vertical scroll webtoon style comic that template that I could go learn from. But I do think I've sort of like piecemealed mine together of like I started from screenwriting, so I write in a screenwriting software, and it is literally like panel one, this happens, dialogue, 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 and then
Mhm.
panel two. And I do think it's important that I do that because I want to give the artist as much material to work with as they potentially need. But I do think at the same time, one of the things I would say to really keep in mind if you do write this full script style is that you are giving your collaborators the room to say, like, okay, you wrote this sword slashing moment as 4 panels. I think I could do it in one and it's going to look really cool. There are complications about that, just like from a logistics level. It's like, okay, well, now I need to go renumber everything else. But
Yeah.
it's absolutely worth it to deal with that complication because that the end product just looks so much better because you gave them the room. And yet at the same time, I do think like I unless an artist specifically requested like, hey, give me less detailed scripts, which that has happened before. I've definitely worked with artists who are like, hey, don't do the panel breakdowns for me because it's just easier if I have like a fresh slate to work with. And frankly, that makes my life easier. So I'm happy to
Yeah.
do that. But I do think I prefer to give that full panel by panel breakdown just because I really want to I want to make sure that they have everything they need to make it work and that they're not like this doesn't make sense. So like if I have to make it make sense for me first before I can give it to someone else so that hopefully I'm not giving them something awful and nonsensical. So
Yeah.
yeah, I tend to write very long scripts and just on a formatting level it ends up uh I don't know what the exact word count is, but the scripts end up being like anywhere from 12 to 20 pages long each episode. But it's not
Wow.
as long as it sounds because
Yeah.
of the if you've ever read a screenplay, like there's so
Yeah.
much like blank space in that.
Right.
So it's not as long as it sounds.
Okay. Yeah, because I've been interested in that because like you said, there's not a standard way for a writer to hand off a script or whatever they've written to an artist for a comic. So it's
Yeah.
interesting to hear that different people have kind of their different methods of doing it. And most
Yeah,
people
some
I
of
think
the
revert to like the screenplay format.
yeah, I think so as well. I think when you don't have a template to work with, you just search for like, okay, well, what templates do exist? And screenwriting is one where it is a little more standardized, so it's little easier to jump to. I pride myself on I try to make my scripts, even though no one but the art team reads them. I try to make my scripts look very good. The
Mhm.
formatting is very clean because here's something I learned very early on: no one wants to read scripts. Even if someone likes my writing and they want
Yeah.
to consume something I've written, they don't want to read my script. Who like that's so like monotonous and boring and it's
Yeah.
not at all close to what the final product is going to look like. So I think it is something I pride myself on is like, okay, if I'm going to force this person to read my script to do their job, at the very least let me format it in a way that is clean and easy. And not to toot my own horn, but I have had people say like, oh, this is one of the best scripts I've ever looked at. So
Nice. That's
uh,
great.
but I do think that's something. If you are a comic writer and you are working with an artist, try very hard to like understand the ask you are asking of this person and understand the annoyance of that and make their life easier as much as you can. And for me that means like, okay, this panel sort of like divides onto the next page. I'm just doing a page break here so it's a little cleaner. Let me make sure my reference images aren't just like blown up and like throwing off all the dialogue, and just making sure it all looks as nicely as possible so that again, no one wants to do this, at least make it easier for them.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of why I formatted the scripts for the podcast to make them look nice and
Hmm.
adhere to my guest
It
comics.
was a clean document.
So I'm like, I know I have a lot of questions here, so let me just add a little bit more visual elements to
Yeah.
it. So, you've written for a lot of like fantasy and action. Are those your favorite genres to write for, or do you have a different genre that you like to write for?
I do think. I mean, I think it's my like most comfortable. I would say I'm most comfortable writing a fight scene with like swords and stuff. So I think favorite. There's some merit to that. I do think the thing that I've not had much of a chance to write that I am just eagerly waiting for is a sports title. I may
Ooh,
not look it. It may not be normal among webtoon readers, but I love sports. I love basketball. I'm a huge Boston Celtics fan. Rest in peace, Jason
nice.
Tatum. Not rest in peace. He's not dead. He has an Achilles injury.
Oh
But
man.
good well wishes to him. And I've always dreamed of writing a basketball title. When I actually uh, first was starting to talk with Webtoon, I actually had a basketball title on Canvas that unfortunately only got a couple episodes in before I had to drop it because this opportunity came along.
Mm.
But yeah, I've messaged producers multiple times like, "Hey, you guys doing anything sports related? Because I'd love to, write a basketball thing." And my favorite Webtoon is The Boxer, which is a boxing title.
Mhm.
Um, I love so many there's a couple of esports titles on like DoubleClick that I think are really, really great. And yeah, so I can't say favorite because I haven't had the chance to write it as much, but
Yeah.
I am waiting for the day where someone says, "All right, let's do it. Let's do that basketball title." Because I swear to God, I'll write the best basketball title. It's difficult because here's the thing. If Haikyuu was on Webtoon, Haikyuu would be so successful, right? Like it perfectly
Totally
like
would.
Webtoon readers would love Haikyuu. If you
Yes.
haven't read Haikyuu, absolutely go read or watch Haikyuu. But I do think it's difficult because it's very feast or famine where the average reader is like there's that jump of like I don't like sports, I'm not going to read a sports title. And if you can get over that, suddenly they realize like, hey, this is just a normal story like any other story, and you have the chance to be a Haikyuu and you could be this huge mega hit. But I think it's so difficult because if you can't get over that hump, you are gonna like no one just the average reader just is like, I don't like sports, I'm not even going to give it a try. And that is a very feast or famine genre, which is
Mm.
why I haven't written it yet. But someday.
I would love to see more sports titles on Webtoon. I feel like it's people are going for like the fantasy isekai, um, just reincarnation or like those titles. I would love to see some more sports titles because I love Haikyuu.
Yeah,
Like,
I do
I
think.
fell in
I
love
mean,
with it.
Haikyuu is. I have a. Can you see my tattoo right here? I don't know if you can see it, but I have a Haikyuu tattoo on my arm.
Oh my
It's the school logo. It's the fly.
Amazing.
The school motto rather. Yeah, so I love Haikyuu. I do think Webtoon is a field where you really need a trailblazer to show like this thing can work, and then suddenly everyone's like, oh, of course, let's all do these reincarnation stories. Let's all do these like lit RPG game type stories. But you need someone to really break in, and maybe that's me. Maybe I'm the guy who's
I
gonna
would
make
love it.
sports something.
Yes.
Someone has to. Someone has to
Exactly. I would love to see that. That would be awesome.
someday.
So, um, so how does, writing for a webtoon kind of differ, or does it differ at all from writing like a traditional comic in your experience?
Um, I think so. I'll use the example of like a Marvel or DC style comic because I think comics can be a lot of different things, and you know, getting into the nitty gritty of each version, but would be difficult. But I think when I look at things coming from Marvel or DC, huge fan. This is not at all criticism, but I think you can pretty much tell right away. It's like these types of stories are just entirely different. I think there are a lot of factors that go into it. I think one of the biggest factors I don't see people talk a lot about is that Marvel and DC titles come out once a month, and webtoons come out every single week. And I think that allows for a certain type of pacing that you can get in a webtoon that is just you it's very hard to ask of a reader of a superhero story to be like, um I'm going to tell you this, I'm going to give you this chunk of story, and it's not complete. Like it really needs that next episode to be complete, but you're not going to get it for another month. And expecting them to come back and remember you is like really, really difficult. As for a webtoon, like the strength of a cliffhanger is that like they're not going to forget me by next week. I mean, hopefully they're not going to forget me. So I think the pacing of your stories can be a little different. I think when it comes to superhero stories, you have to tell a little bit more of a complete story in each issue, even though you can have a long running story arc. Each issue itself needs to be relatively self-contained so that it is something that people are not going to be like, I don't want to wait another month for this. That's where you don't have to deal with webtoon, where it's like I can be a little more flexible in the type of story I'm going to tell. I also think, plainly speaking, the genres of stories are entirely different. I mean, I think there are stories, I mean, for one, like the webtoon reader base is skewed so much more towards women that like you are getting stories that like DC's not. I mean, nowadays they're leaning a bit more to it, but like DC's not going to put out a title like The Mafia Nanny because those readers just aren't reading from DC, or maybe
Mhm.
DC's just not interested in catering to those readers. Whatever the case is, there are certain types of stories that you can only really get from webtoon, and to be blunt, like I really like the Mafia Nanny. I really like
I
stories
love
like that.
Mafia
So
Nanny.
yeah, I you know, I like I said, I came through Lore Olympus. I didn't mention that earlier. I have not had the chance to write a romance title. I do think um I have an idea for like an action romance title with like
Ooh.
angels and devils, and I really I have a script. I have not pitched it to anyone yet, but one of these days I will.
Oh, I
Um,
love that idea.
so yeah, I do think romance is something that like works so well with Webtoon that other publishers have not seemed to really be able to find the way to make it work as well. So when I think about Webtoon, it's like those are the things that come to mind. Obviously, the more like superficial, not superficial, but like the art differences of the vertical
Mhm,
scroll versus the page. I do think that's a consideration. Um, but I mean, to me, those are a little more superficial. I think people get hung up on that stuff. I think there are a lot of types of ways you could visually tell stories in webtoons, and I think a lot of times I hear people from who have not worked in webtoons, who have not really read webtoons, as being a little more dismissive of like the vertical scroll style because they're just so used to like the page. And again, I am a huge comic fan. I don't want to criticize that at all, but I do think people assume vertical scroll is like a lot harder to make work than it actually is. You could still have wide shots in a webtoon. In fact, I see them all the time. So yeah, I do think there are differences, but I think both are great. you know,
yeah,
I think I like writing both. I do actively write both. I just finished writing like an actual 8-page short comic that I'm working
mhm,
with an artist with right now. I also I was part of an anthology with Lifeline Comics, an aromantic asexual anthology, which I worked with the Fantasy High storyboard artist on. That was not vertical scroll, that was a traditional comic. So I try to maintain in both worlds because I do think both have their strengths and advantages. I think both are incredible, but yeah, give them both a shot.
yeah, it's interesting because I got into webtoons in, like, 2018. I didn't start my first one until, like, 2021, but, most people I talk to, they're kind of the route that they take is, like, they were reading comics or manga when they were young, and then they discovered webtoons. For me, is the opposite.
Oh, really?
Webtoons pushed me into loving comics, like, traditional comics and manga, and I think, like you said, there's pros and cons to doing both, right? Um, and you just, at least from the artist side, you kind of map things out differently depending on the format you're working with. And
Yeah,
mobile comics had their limitations, but I feel like people take advantage of what they're limited and do some really cool things. Like Rachel Smythe did awesome stuff with Lore
exactly.
Olympus. Like the way I don't know how she came up with how she did those scene transitions because she had very like stylistic, graphic ways of portraying a scene or where she
hmm
put Persephone in a scene, especially in the earlier chapters.
Yeah.
But
I think whenever I get a list of like, oh, but I couldn't do this panel, I couldn't do this panel, I couldn't do this page in a vertical scroll, and I'm like, maybe that's true. Maybe there's no way to make it work. But there are also so many new things you could do,
Mhm.
and it's less about like stop. I try to reframe it as like what can't I do and like what is a new possibility, like what
Yeah.
is something unique and interesting that like only this medium preserves. Like of course at the end of the day a comic is not going to be moving in the same way a movie is, but that doesn't mean the comic is less than the movie. It just means it's a new opportunity to do something else. I also think I very early on when I was working with Webtoon, someone at the company described it to me as like uh, you could almost think of like Webtoon as closer to an animatic rather than it is a comic.
Mhm.
And I think you could see that a lot in the ways where the build up to actions, where they like the pacing of like we're gonna draw the character unsheathing their sword, we're gonna have them pulling back the sword, and we're gonna have them showing down as if you were actually animating this for a movie. I think um, when I started thinking about that, it actually helped me write more because I do think it's very easy to think like I could do this shot of a character swinging their sword in one panel. That could work, and there are times where that is the right move. But also, like the buildup is just a little more dramatic if I really pace it out, and I know that like the reader is gonna have to scroll through each one, and like the anticipation is building up to this big action moment. Um, in a way of like when I think about it, like as if this were an animatic. I also want to say your story of like discovering webtoons before you became a fan of comic and manga. I think that's probably a story we're going to hear a lot more of, because I
Yeah.
think one of the beauty of webtoons is that it is so accessible and it's tapping into an audience, like I said before, with how much it's used towards like women and romance and all these titles. It's tapping into an audience that is largely underserved in other places. There are plenty of great romance manga, make no mistake about that, but
Mhm.
there's so many readers who are like, I've never read a comic, I've never read manga, I've never really dabbled in any of this stuff, who like you could hand them a webtoon and it will be their next favorite thing, because they've just never had it presented in this way before. And I think the fact that you could read it on your phone, you could read it like while you're, like laying in bed or something, in a way that is a little bit harder to do with other things. Um, it's just so accessible. And that's like one of the things that really drew me initially when I first discovered webtoons, is like, it's just, it's doing it in a way that I haven't seen anyone else do it. And I think that's largely why you can, like, it's not hard to see why webtoon has become so successful, is because it is like, it's doing it in a new way. It's solving the challenges that a lot of other publishers and companies weren't able to solve, of like tapping into a new audience and presenting the story in a way that is easy and comfortable for them. um so yeah, I think your story of like webtoons being the first thing you've experienced, I think we're probably going to hear a lot more of that as time goes on.
Yeah, I think so too. And that's why, I'm in the same boat. That's why I love webtoons is like it's so fun to just be able to because you have original side and you have canvas side. And there's so much talent on both ends, and it's so fun
Yeah,
to just be able to discover new stories. And sure, you could get a book, but the fact that you can read webtoons for free is also a really awesome
huge.
thing. Huge thing, right? Because people are like, oh, I don't have to go buy a manga, or I don't have to go buy a comic book.
Yeah,
I can read it on my phone for free, which I think is awesome.
this is like a personal philosophy of mine, is just that like I don't like paywalling anything I create.
Hmm.
um Obviously there are times where it's like, okay, you need to, like, just like to make the financial aspect of it work, you need to have certain things locked behind a Patreon. I get it, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah,
But I sort of like, at a base level, I just think I really believe in like, I'm gonna put this art out for free, I'm gonna let it tap into as wide an audience as possible. And like, once I have the readers, then we could start thinking about like, okay, we'll do a print edition, and that print edition, obviously we're gonna have to, there are costs there, so we're gonna, and that's how like it's gonna pay for itself. Because and that's one of the things like I really love about webtoon, is that like so much of it is free to read. And if you have the means, if you are really really in love with the story, then it's like, then you could support them on Patreon, then you could fast pass, then you could buy the merch, whatever. But I do think being able to just present the story without the initial paywall, I mean, it'd be easy to say, like, like many other publishers do, is like, you have to pay $3 to read an issue, or $4 or whatever. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. I just think, to me, it's like, I would rather have, instead of setting that initial paywall where I'm going to maybe make a little bit more money but limit how many people, I'd rather just have as many people reading it as possible. And then later down the line we'll figure out, like, how, is there a way we could do a print version, or is there something like a merch we could sell, or is there something we could offer on Patreon that would make this all work financially. And also, by the way, I understand there's like a little bit of privilege involved in that, of like, I know some people just need, they like, just financially they just need to make it work right now. But I think if you can make it work, I think that's one of the things I love about webtoon, is that so much story, so many of the stories are just completely free to read from the
yeah.
get-go.
One of my guests that I interviewed a little while ago, so they started publishing their comic on Canvas, and they're from New Zealand, and they found out there was this grant from this organization in New Zealand that was like supporting artists. And so they literally used their comic on Canvas and the audience that they've started to build to get a grant to publish it as a book.
That's awesome.
And so they got the grant to do it. And I feel like Canvas is such a great place, especially if an artist wants to, like, okay, I want to put out my comic. And if they can grow their audience to whatever point, they're like, okay, I have a big enough audience. I can go pitch to a publisher. Maybe I could get a print publishing deal. And I've seen that
Hmm.
happen, and it's really cool.
Yeah, I do. You keep bringing up Canvas, and I fully agree. Of Yeah, I was mentioning earlier that like one of the reasons I really like dug into the Webtoon site is because anyone could upload to Canvas,
Yeah.
and there was this path to success. Like I saw it, even again for like even at other publishers where I have dreams of someday working there. It's like I don't really see many people like making that climb. It seems very abstract and difficult, and there was no abstraction with Webtoon, where it was like very very clearly I was following a title and it was uploaded to Canvas. This person was doing it on their own with whatever resources they had, and then suddenly now it's on an original. Now it's an original, and it's hugely successful, and this person's entire career is made. And I think that's such a beautiful thing. Like I
Yeah.
think that doesn't really exist in a lot of other places,
No,
especially not for
no.
comics. Um, yeah, so I just think the Canvas whole thing of like anyone could upload and you could find your own audience there. I just think it's amazing.
Yeah. I have a lot of friends that have just gotten a lot of success on Canvas, and they were able to quit their job because their Canvas, and like they earn enough on Patreon that they're like, okay, cool. I can
Yeah.
just do comics, and that's what I'm gonna do. One of my really good friends, I have her whole she's had 4 Kickstarters to turn her comic volumes into books, and they've
Hmm.
been ultra successful every single time.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about. I mean, because I'm on Canvas, right? So I'll talk a lot about it. But that's just again, that's what I love about it. There's so much opportunity with
I would say
Webtoons. So
shout out to the people who are constantly running Kickstarters.
yeah.
I've run one and I've been a part of two more, and oh my god, it's so hard. It is so
Oh, I'm
much work.
sure. I'm sure.
Yeah. So if you're someone who's like, yeah, I just run 4 Kickstarters every year, you are a soldier, and thank you.
Yeah,
You're amazing.
definitely. So for anybody who's listening right now, what is some advice that you would give them when they're thinking about writing for a comic?
I knew this question would come up, and I spent a long time thinking about like, is there some piece of like really good advice that you haven't heard before that maybe I could give? And I don't know if I have anything. I'll be honest, because I think part of the issue is when you're I actually love giving really practical advice. I love when I speak to someone and they're like, "Hey, I'm working on this story and I'm running into this issue," or "I released it and we're in this genre, but it's not doing as well as I thought it would." And I love being able to really dive into the specifics of like, "Okay, here's where I think you could improve your odds this way," blah blah blah. But I do think when we speak broadly, I think I can only give you some relatively generic and cliche advice, but I do think the advice is meaningful, and I do think ultimately, as even though you may have heard it before, it is no less important, which is that you have to start by creating. At the end of the day, no one is going to know what this great story in your head if it's only in your head. It has to exist in some way. And I think coming from the writer's perspective, I understand the difficulty in that because I do think um, like I said earlier, no one wants to read scripts. So you do have to get that project made somehow, which means either finding an artist who is so in love with the story that they're willing to collaborate, or paying one. And that's difficult for so many logistical reasons. But at the end of the day, if you don't have something made, that's step one, and you haven't even taken step one. So that's ultimately the very first thing you have to do. Once you have something made, you have to keep doing it. And that's really, really tough because there's no potential end. It's not like, oh, once I get to 10, then 10 is the magic number and now everything just falls into place. It's like, no, it might be three. It might, the first one might be the huge success. It might be the second one. It might be the 10th one. I made, um, I made like 4 or 5 Webtoon titles before I got any work with them. So there's a process there and you have to keep going and you have to have that perseverance. And in line with that, I think the third thing is that you really need to have patience. I do think I'm a firm believer in that, the cream rises to the top, and that if you are good, there are people out there who want to find you and want to work with you. I've been on the other end as a writer who is constantly looking for artists to work with. I have a folder tab on my browser, which is hundreds of artists' portfolios bookmarked, and I'm constantly sorting through them. I'm constantly adding to it because I know that like as many talented people are out there, like there's such a hunger that like we are constantly on the lookout, both us writers, publishers, anyone. And I think the biggest thing holding people back is that they maybe either haven't written something, or they haven't created something, or if they have, they created it years ago and it's like buried under, so many other titles that you can't really find anymore. So I do think it's that combination of creating perseverance and patience, where it's like you are constantly putting your work out there. You are always trying to find new readers and trying to communicate like, hey, I want to do this. I want to tell this story. I want to tell more stories like it. And also the patience of like knowing that there are people on the other side who are trying to find you, and eventually they will get there. It might take a long time. It might be short, depending on, whatever factors in the universe line up. But ultimately, if the talent is there, then the rest will come at some point. And if the talent isn't there, then hopefully that talent develops as you create titles, right? Like part of creating titles isn't just to be noticed, but it's also to get better, to refine your skills. The first things that I wrote, there are some elements that I like, but largely I look back at them and I think this guy has a lot to improve. And I slowly improved over and over again. So I do think, at the end of the day, you just have to keep going. And I wish I could offer more specific advice, but if you do have any specific questions, feel free to ask them. But broadly speaking, I think that's the best advice I can give.
No, I think that that is such an important component to it too, in the journey of creating and writing, and in this case, webtoon creators, because I feel like, especially after the contest, the shortlist came out, I had so many friends that were really disappointed that they didn't shortlist, and I'm like, hey, look, okay, I gave them examples. I'm like, Instant Miso, Mayor Banastre, who else? Ingrid Ochoa, Courtney Worth. They all entered contests in the past, and they
Mm-hmm.
didn't. They didn't win. They didn't get a shortlist. They didn't get a runner up. But like, look where they are now because they kept going with it. And I think that it's so important to keep that in mind. That maybe this isn't your time right now to. Maybe that success is coming at a later point, but the important aspect is to just keep going with it and just love what you're making, right? I think that's the
Yeah,
biggest
absolutely.
thing.
I will also say, on the note of the contest, is like I know so many examples of people who lost the contest, but that doesn't mean they weren't good and that people didn't notice. People
There were so
absolutely
many
notice.
good
Yeah.
comics. I bet it was really hard for everybody to choose.
Yeah, and I will say one of the great things about this contest and contests like these is that it's like one of the few guaranteed times in this industry where it's like, if you entered, someone's going to look at it. And
Mhm.
I think I know so many personal examples of people who again did not win, did not get shortlisted or anything, but suddenly they're on an editor or producer's radar, and it's like
Yeah.
maybe right now this wasn't it, or but that maybe the story just needed a little bit of work and we just want to see another round before we reach out to the person. Or maybe it's like, hey, this story isn't there, but the art is incredible and we want to work with them on something else.
Yeah.
And it's hard to know. Yeah, early on I had written a title for Canvas, and I got like 12 episodes in, and I dropped it because I just thought like it didn't work. No, 12 episodes in, and the audience really isn't there, and it's unfortunate. And then years and years later, I'm just chatting with a former webtoon editor, and we're talking, and he drops it like, "Oh yeah, I've been following you since that first title, or not first, one of those early titles. I've
Hmm.
been following you since then." And there was this title that I'd given up on that I thought no one was reading, and yet here was this editor who was like, "No, I had my eyes on you, and it wasn't ready yet, and it just never the stars didn't align." But you'd be surprised at who might be in the audience and who might be paying attention. So you might be closer than you think, if that's any motivation at all. You might be a little bit closer and on some people's radars than it
Yeah.
might seem from the outside.
Yeah. And that's like one of my friends, they're an artist and writer duo. I was so certain that they would get shortlisted because their comic, I feel like, is just they have the right components that really align with what I've seen Webtoon really like, and they didn't get shortlisted.
Hmm.
And the artist, she was mostly okay with it. She's like, okay, well, it didn't happen. But the writer was just like really devastated. And so I was just like, you can be devastated. It is okay. It's very valid. You can be disappointed and sad, but like, don't let that stop you. Because I
Yeah,
look at their
absolutely.
comic and I'm like, this is incredible. Like, please keep doing this. And I feel like I'm like, at some point, I think you guys have like all the right things. It's just a matter of timing and what happens, right? So I'm just like, just keep going. It's
Yeah.
worth it.
Timing is a huge one too, because and there's so many things where it's like you don't even know. Like, it's possible that like you might have had a perfect title, and if it was 6 months earlier or later, maybe that would have gotten picked up. But
Mhm,
now, because of just where it is, there's another title that is too similar, so it's just not the great timing, and like you would have no way of knowing that, and that's just the way it crumbles sometimes, and it's unfortunate.
mhm,
I will also say, as much as I've talked about like how great it is to eventually be picked up by Webtoon, there's so many great examples of people who are like, this was not an original, it never was an original, it's never going to be, but is so successful on Canvas, and
mhm,
this person is absolutely succeeding and doing everything they want to do. They're telling the story they want to tell it, and they're not beholden to any schedules they can't fulfill. It's like it's everything that they might want. And again, that's just another beautiful thing about Canvas is that like you it's not I've said a lot about like finding success going from Canvas to originals, but also like living on Canvas is absolutely something that a lot of people do,
mhm.
and there are a lot of benefits to that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a great place for people to find success. And it's also a great place for people to kind of learn the ropes of
Hmm.
comic creation and see how they can improve and grow by just putting their work out there and hopefully getting some feedback if they're open to it. Yeah, I think it's just a great place for people to just learn how to create
Yeah,
comic.
and also, and just to be perfectly honest, the Canvas readers tend to be a little bit nicer than original readers.
Yeah,
I
they
think
are. They're
like
very
Canvas
different
readers,
audiences.
yeah, Canvas readers kind of know what the deal is. It's like that these are a lot of like people making their first comics, and they tend to be. I mean, listen, on my time at Canvas, I definitely dealt with my own fair share of crappy people who like rate bomb and whatever, and that absolutely sucks. It happens, but by and large, I think Canvas readers understand as like, hey, I'm here because I'm specifically looking for a story that you might not be able to find anywhere else, and I'm a little more like gracious and accepting. And yeah, so that's another one of those beautiful things about Canvas.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. I did have one last question for you before we wrap up today. Would you rather write a title for DC Go, or would you rather write a title for Avatar: The Last Airbender with Dark Horse
Oh my
Comics?
god, that is crazy. It's like you read my mind. That is like that's the most honest dilemma I have faced in my life ever. Oh my god, that is so hard. I think I'm a huge DC fan. I like truly, I love DC, and depending on the superhero or the character, it would maybe be that. Obviously, if they're like, hey, I'll tell you someone I've been thinking about a lot recently. I don't know. Have you ever watched the Teen Titans cartoon,
The original one on
like
Cartoon Network?
2003? Yeah.
Yes, I love it. Are you kidding me?
There's a character, yeah, Red X in that show. They
Yes.
don't they don't do a lot with Red X in current comics. I would love to be the guy who does Red X. So if they were like, hey, you could do a Red X title, please, absolutely, I would absolutely love to do a Red X title. But there's also some like so few people get to work on the Avatar titles that like being a part of that legacy, being a part of all these amazing creators, and like contributing to the actual like canon of the universe. I am a huge Avatar fan, so I do think I would maybe at a default have to go with that one.
Yeah. Which I would agree with. I'd be like, heck yeah, put me on the team.
But you absolutely nailed me with that question. That was like you lasered in on my interest right there.
Amazing. Okay, Derek, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was such a delight to talk to you and learn more about you. And yeah, thank you for coming on.
Of course, it was a lot of fun. I'd love to do it again sometime.
So, where can people find you online?
Um, I mostly am on Blue Sky. What is my Blue Sky? I mean, I think it's just Derek V Song on Blue Sky. Mostly there. I do have a Twitter account. I don't really use it as much. And then if you want to like read all my stuff, I have links to everything on my actual website, which is dvsong.com. So if I have anything new, that's probably where I'll be posting links to it.
Perfect. Okay, awesome. I will include all of your links in our show notes. Everyone, go read Fantasy High, go support it. And if you're into Fantasy High, go give Fantasy High Dimension 20 a watch. It's amazing. And Brendan Lee Mulligan is an incredible DM. He just,
Absolutely.
it's amazing. The entire cast was awesome. Yeah, so go support it. And sorry, what was
No worries.
there was something I was going to say and it left my brain. That's okay. Okay, so I will just do my regular outro and then we can just be done.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
If you found this podcast episode informative or entertaining, give us a like, give us a follow. You can find us on our socials at the Webtoon Wave. We're on TikTok, we're on Instagram, and you can watch full episodes on Spotify and YouTube. So stay creative, stay inspired, and we'll see you next time.